What matters is that there is so much power wielded by the people who would be inconvenienced. And that's always the case. And I want to stress this. That's not that's not born of some evil. That's born of some notion that generations earlier, William Mulholland was able to build his viaduct, and really that caused terrible abuse to communities that couldn't speak up for themselves. And we've simply overcorrected for trying to withhold opportunities for powerful people to do that. You need to find some sort of compromise, some sort of middle ground where these people who would be impacted by a project like high-speed rail have a voice but aren't able to veto it. Like right at the turn of the 20th century, when you had the imposition of these big, huge trusts and railroads and whatnot, progressivism was divided on how to handle this. On one side were people who thought that the solution would be through antitrust, so breaking up the big corporations so that we could go back to sort of the old 19th century economy of small businesses. And others wanted to create big, huge bureaucracies that would oversee these big companies and make sure that they were doing the right thing and weren't overcharging passengers or freight or weren't abusing the people who had been giving them license to run their trains through a town in Ohio or Pennsylvania or wherever it was. What we need today is once again to create the sorts of institutions, whether it's a blue ribbon institution, whether it's a public utility commission, whether it's a just an elected official, ultimately who decides. You need to figure out who ultimately has the decision-making power. You know, I often, when I talk about the book, I often bring up the fact that, on Friday nights, I have two daughters and a wife, and when my daughters were younger, they would come home from school, and my wife would return home from work, and neither she nor I wanted to cook, and so we'd sort of say, "Look, why don't we go out tonight?" And then you had the two of us, and daughters 11 and 8, all having to have a discussion about where to have dinner. And like that's a pretty messy process, right? Everyone's got a different opinion. The 11-year-old wants to, go to a fried chicken restaurant, hold the chicken part, and the 8-year-old just wants donuts, and my wife wants, unseasoned quinoa at a new place down the street or whatever it is. And you have to pick a process for deciding how you select your restaurant. And like, there's still politics there per se. I mean, there's lots of politics in a family, but there's no right or wrong answer. Should the mom always get to decide? Should the parents always get to decide? Should everyone get a choice, each consecutive week so that, next week the younger daughter will decide and we'll go get donuts for dinner, right? Or should everybody get to put out an idea and everyone else can veto? It is this is what government is supposed to do. And so we've done it in the past. This is not a new American phenomenon that we have people disagreeing about what we should invest in. We can have a process where someone is ultimately responsible.
Hi, I'm Janice, and I am co-founder of Jews United for Democracy and Justice, as well as the America at a Crossroads weekly virtual town hall series. If you like this video, don't just watch. Head over to our website where you can subscribe for early access to new programs, see our upcoming schedules, and participate in our weekly live streams. You can also connect directly with our guests live on Zoom. Head over to JewsUnitedForDemocracy.org. Thanks for watching.
I look at the state of California, which to me is a fascinating laboratory because you have a Democratic supermajority in the state legislature. And you have a high percentage of those Democrats whose major donors are labor unions, public employee unions, but also some in the private sector, nurses, other groups, who are very influential with California lawmakers because they turn out the vote, they organize, they have a lot of volunteers and a lot of money to spend on candidates' races. And even with that supermajority, you see factionalism within California Democrats. You see difficulty taking on big projects. The high-speed rail project has been, to this point, a total debacle with the costs soaring out of control. And even with its reduced ambitions, even that's delayed many years until even the segment of the Central Valley is covered with the high-speed rail project. So free marketers say, well, this is exhibit A of why government really can't and shouldn't do these things. The Bright Line, which is going to be built largely with private investor dollars, is way ahead of the game in building a high-speed rail from Las Vegas to the Inland Empire of Southern California. That's the model they say we should take. Let the private sector take the risk and build these things. Private sector wouldn't build a high-speed rail connecting northern and southern California because the risk is too great. Just what did happen would have happened with private investors. So what's your response to that you think government should do these projects?
Well, I think that the two projects you mentioned, the one from Rancho Cucamonga to Las Vegas and the high-speed rail between LA and San Francisco, are just two fundamentally different projects. And you could have government or the private sector handle either one of them, and they'd come up against the same challenges, right? The way to make high-speed rail is to have a straight line, don't have turns, right? That's when trains get up to their top speed, is when they're on a straightaway. And so if you're going to have a straightaway, it means you're going to cut through more communities. And so the problem with getting between LA and San Francisco is that there's so many places that you wouldn't want to cut through. Right? It's either very expensive or you have to build a very expensive underpass or an overpass. You can't cut through a very nice suburb or or maybe even not a particularly expensive suburb. People don't want their communities bisected by a rail line. That's not a that the ability to veto that project is not born of whether the person proposing it is a private sector company or Amtrak or a California utility. That doesn't matter. What matters is that there is so much power wielded by the people who would be inconvenienced. And that's always the case. And I want to stress this. That's not that's not born of some evil. That's born of some notion that generations earlier, William Mulholland was able to build his viaduct, and really that caused terrible abuse to communities that couldn't speak up for themselves. And we've simply overcorrected for trying to withhold opportunities for powerful people to do that. You need to find some sort of compromise, some sort of middle ground where these people who would be impacted by a project like high-speed rail have a voice but aren't able to veto it.
Also, I just want to remind you that next Wednesday evening, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, who I spoke with just yesterday on my radio program, Karen Bass will be with Madeline Brand for an hour-long conversation on immigration enforcement that has roiled Los Angeles. Talk about President Trump's response to LA's pushback to the methods used in immigration enforcement in Los Angeles. That's next Wednesday, July 2nd at 5 o'clock Pacific. LA Mayor Karen Bass. From all of us at America to Crossroads, have a terrific evening. Thank you for joining us.